Hey gang, thanks for the handoff, Paudie. And I think there's probably there's an interesting common theme coming through a lot of the sessions today, certainly from what I'm about to go through around the idea of coherence, and even Mary's piece there on visualization. But let me just give you a flavor for what I want to cover. I'm going to talk through what has sort of been an experiment, if you want, over the last 5 or 6 years with what happens when you inject data into an organization. And with Citrix now, as with IBM before that. And I run business intelligence for the company. And my job is to try and make everybody data-driven. And I'm interested in what we want to show through is what happens when you actually attempt to do that. And back to this point that everyone keeps talking about is the 70% failure rate. So everyone knows about it, but why, what is it? Why do these projects fail? And in particular, for me, I'm interested in, is there a particular aspect to data and analytics initiatives that make these, some of these transformations that little bit more challenging? So I'm going to talk through what was the experiment about, how do we approach it, what happened, and why do we think, there's some, I've got some working hypotheses about what some of these patterns are. I'll touch on some simple rules that we've learned through practice. And then there's a couple of questions I'm looking at for research as well. Okay, so first off, for some context, what was the problem that we set out to address? Again, I'm a practitioner, so even though I've done my master's with Paudie and the team here, and in and out of the PhD group, you have to remember I'm trying to solve for real world problems in my day-to-day working environment. So the problem we started off with was one, back in 2015, 2016, about. At the time I was with IBM, and now we've moved on and the practice has evolved. But fundamentally, finding customers in a sales and marketing environment is pretty hard work. Okay, and the truth is that the baseline measure here that the industry looks at is, for every 100 customers that I reach out to, how many of those turn into a qualified business opportunity? Now, you can talk to lots of people and they won't do anything and they won't go anywhere. So the critical bit is a qualified opportunity. How many of these have budget, authority, need, and time frame? There's something here worth pursuing. And the industry base at best is 4%. At best. Most companies hover around the 2% mark, which means that you spend an awful lot of effort and time reaching out to customers, whether you're selling coffee or selling high-end technology or healthcare products, trying to find people who have needs you're trying to help them with. Okay, so what was the big idea? Well, wouldn't it be interesting if we injected the client engagement cycle with lots of data? This whole big data thing is pretty cool. Let's give it a go and see what happens. And the issue that you're really trying to solve for is this one down the bottom. Okay, as a seller or a marketeer or whoever, who should I be talking to, when, about what, and how should I engage them? Okay, so what did we do? Standard stuff. Now, this has evolved a little bit on the technical stack, because everyone always asks the question. We bought loads of data, lots and lots of data, okay, billions of data points. We then integrate it to a big warehouse. And then 3 and 4 is where the analytical component comes in. Okay, so you build models. You build models, a little bit like Kieran's mentioned earlier on, to solve for the problems that you've been asked to address. Okay, but not only are you solving for individual solve for X, find me a customer who wants to buy a BMW 3 Series, you're trying to do a more holistic set of models as well, is solve for all things considered. What's different then is that, as opposed to lots of analytical artifacts, which just sits, there's a list, use it as you wish. What we do then is we integrate it into the entire workflow of the company, the CRM. So it's how people execute. So whether they're managing their territory, planning marketing investments, whatever they do, there's a workflow component to it. So it's not an idle thing. It doesn't sit inactive on the side of the business. It drives workflow and it drives behavior of the business. That in turn then creates a feedback system, which of course then gives us data back to see what happened. Now, two critical points here is, in terms of our modeling, very, very low fidelity, wouldn't even come close to touching the stuff that, say, Kieran is working on in Heineken. And I'll come back to that. It's a really interesting point. And secondly, the feedback loop at the end of the mechanism allows us to observe what has worked and what hasn't. Okay, and that's a critical piece. So what do we do with that? Over the course of 5 years and 14 project iterations, what we've developed is a whole set of use cases. We've now got, we've had 900 end users of this mechanism. It's one part data, one part process, one part tool, where it drives the behavior of hundreds of people across the organization on a daily basis, whether you're in finance or sales or marketing or customer success or engineering. There's a different use case for you. We treat data and analytics in Citrix like a product. So in that regard, what we obsess about is adoption and absorption. Okay. Now, the other interesting point here is down the bottom right is the numbers. Forget the fact there's lots of data in it, of course there is, but we have 30,000 new interactions that we can observe now that with data we never had before. The 96% of customers we talked to who weren't interested in our propositions before, they were never, ever captured. The system never captured them. So that data was invisible. That insight was invisible. We now have massive amounts of data we never had before. We created a process to capture it. 30,000 might not sound a lot, but this is a B2B environment, not a B2C. We're not selling, it's not FMCG. We're talking about very highly complex solution selling. So it's a pretty big number. So what happened? So this is what we call the sawtooth graph. What you're basically measuring here is the efficacy of the model or the artifact over time. Okay, what we're actually measuring is that customer conversion rate. So again, for every 100 customers I reach out to say, would you like to talk to me about a widget? How many of those convert into this, I got this, there's an opportunity here, and then we win it out. Okay. What you can see over time is that the number has gone up and up and up and up. Okay, the baseline, let's say, is 4%, but even over time, we have this average now of 21%. It's a massive 5x improvement on where we started. And again, the interesting thing I'd say here is that the massive amount of impact that has been gained is not because of high fidelity, sophisticated analytical models. In actual fact, we don't have any. We have very simple rule-based models, what you'd call an expert model or an espoused model, where you simply say, Paddy, what does a good customer look like for a networking device? I said, well, they're this, and this. And that was a really interesting thing because you were getting all these performance lifts, but we don't have any real AI. There's no machine learning. There's no deep analytics involved. It's simple rule-based. So you say, well, how come it's having this impact? The other thing we're interested in is not the peaks, maybe as much as the troughs. So given these big jumps in performance, how come it drops off? It peaks and then it drops off. How come it's not consistent? It's going in a certain direction. But if this model is outperforming, as we can see it is, why are people, why are these changes in here? And we further look then at the actual adoption and the sort of the cultural absorption into the organization. So how often are people using the capabilities? And how often are they talking to customers using the technology, whatever role they're in? And what you can see is there's this spike. And what we observed was that when there's focus on the executive team, say, like, we're going to do this week, people engage. But as soon as, a little bit like, as a teacher in a class, as soon as your back is turned, people revert to their standard behavior. And this is the sort of phenomenon that we were sort of curious to observe. Now what we started to look at then was, well, what's really going on here? You've got a practice that clearly outcompetes anything that any one individual or any team can do themselves, and everybody acknowledges it. It's now the gold standard where it's been deployed globally to every part of the company all around the world, as was the case with IBM beforehand. But we still have this issue with absorption. And why are people not just saying, okay, great, whatever I was doing beforehand clearly wasn't working. I'll go use this capability now. And so you're starting to tip into this area of what I think works for me and what this approach is telling me to do. As I said, what we saw happening is behavior was being pulled back to pre-existing practices, even though the results were there. So there's this big gravitational pull to pull people back to whatever they were doing beforehand. Okay. So again, we started picking this apart even more. We started looking at the mechanism, the organization as a system. Okay, we said, well, what's going on here? What are they trying to do in sales and what are they trying to do in marketing? Because we work across all these areas to try and drive better performance. And what you actually see is each unit has its own set of corset norms, the languages they use, the KPIs they have, not even at an organizational level, at a team level, on an individual level. There's usually a massive disconnect between the different functions, not even from a just a data perspective, which is pervasive, but almost an ideological perspective, which comes back to, I think someone made the point earlier on, I think it was Ken, about the conflict between teams. It's massive, but not just that it's almost the visualization I tend to use for this is that each of the units and the individuals are they have their own sort of sets of belief. And everyone is has tied down by these perspectives they have on what we should be doing. Here's what I'm doing, or here's what I think what I'm doing, and here's what I'm actually doing. So each of these teams, each of these individuals, each of these functions, each of these units is operating in a manner that is going in 100,000 different directions. And you're starting to tip into this sort of broad idea then that there's a sort of a lack of coherence going on overall. Now, just by pure chance, last night when I was prepping, Mark retweeted a quote from James Clear about this idea of validating information, and you start to tip into this idea that if I come across a concept or idea that is challenging my own view of the world, that I'm a little bit hesitant to maybe go there. And we get this all the time in our team, and this is what we feel we're starting to tip into a little bit. And the interesting thing is, it's often that when you start these projects, there's almost an assumption, and I'm not sure whether Ken or someone else made it, maybe Mary, is that there's almost an assumption that coherence pre-exists within the organization, and you're building a solution for an agreed objective. I'd argue that is not the case. Back to the very first point with Noel, is that strategy will live in a PowerPoint, but often fails to disseminate throughout the organization. I know that's what the company, but this is what I'm doing. This is what I think I'm doing. And actually, what I'm actually doing is something different again. And this is pervasive. There's a lot of companies fail to actually operationalize strategy, and therefore you get this dissonance in execution across the organization. So from a data perspective, from my role, we're constantly in this sort of seesaw of what are we actually solving for? Are we solving for what's presented to us, which is a perspective of an individual? Or are you solving for a bigger picture issue? And of course, it is certainly in a sales and marketing environment, in the private sector, everyone's quarterly driven. It's all very tactical. It's all fire drills. Boom, boom, boom. I need this now. Or why do you need it? Doesn't matter. I need this. And you can be driven crazy putting out fires, as opposed to trying to address things more structurally. And again, to use the famous quote from Henry Ford, is if we ask people what they want, they'll just keep saying, I want a faster horse. As opposed to, are we really solving structurally for the issue, the root cause issue that the organization is really experiencing, and you end up sort of playing whack-a-mole an awful lot. So what our experience is that most end users are looking for sugar hits. Quick, it's 3 o'clock, boom, 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 give me a Snickers, give me a Snickers. When in actual fact, what the organization needs is a much more holistic, structural, systemic approach to problem solving. Ironically, it thinks it's getting problems fixed. I need a dashboard on this, I need insight on this, I need a list from your analytics team on this, but it's their sugar hits. It will be our argument, because you continue to see the same level of activity. The results don't manifest the way they should, and they don't stick. So I might be happy with the list you gave them, but when you challenge them to say, well, what result did you get? They can't stand over it. It hasn't stuck. So the problem then, as we observe it, is you've in truth, in an organization, you've got lots and lots of competing mental models constantly, from an individual level right the way up. The idea of coherence is, and we see it all the time, there's a complete lack of strategic coherence, which is why, back to the results we've got, my instinct and the evidence would suggest that we've been able to create massive performance gains, not because of the sophistication of the model, but because we're actually getting people to shape around one shared mental model of what we should be doing. Because the way we were doing it was, well, what does a good customer for this look like, and how should we approach them? That's literally how expert models work. The other issue, as I've touched on, is that because you've got this diversity of mental models, your stakeholders run to you. And again, in technical communities, in my experience, there's almost there's a drive to, oh, what do you want? Yeah, I'll go build it. And there's a willingness to please your stakeholders. But what if the stakeholders don't really know what the problem is? And they say, I need a dashboard for this, I need a query for that, I need an analytics report on this. But what if they're not presenting the right problem in the first place? And again, a lot of the evidence in my experience is that problems present symptomatically. And ultimately what you're doing is you're building faster horses or faster ways to go after crappy processes or non-existent processes, and you're not solving systematically. So you end up playing whack-a-mole a little bit. The simple rules then, the 6 simple rules that, just the purpose of the session today, I put out there, and then I'll touch a little bit just for one or two slides more on where next. Simple rules I'd advocate is, number 1, visualize the system as a whole. If you did no other thing, it's the first thing I would do. Do not look at the problem in front of you. Look at the problem in the context of how the organization works. Because too often, the organization and data and analytics objectives say, I need a list, I need a list, I need a list. We're selling Mars bars on discount tomorrow, and you're bouncing around. Look back and identify how the organization works, where the cogs and flywheels are, and you can start to identify where real value can be created or inhibited and how that works. Second is pivot from low fidelity. I'd love to have the capabilities that Kieran has, I honestly would, but I don't need them, because my problem isn't one where I need that level of sophistication to fix the problem. So the joke here is sort of, you don't need a Ferrari to drive the kids to school, okay? It's using a hammer to open an egg is another metaphor that's often used for this one. So you pivot from low fidelity. We're not even at machine learning yet, so I don't need it yet. Now, when I get to a point when we're absolutely smashing it, getting that extra percentile improvement of performance, yeah, we'll bring in machine, we'll do all that. But right now, lo-fi works. Third one is identify the needs and not just the wants. We have a mantra in my team whereby you don't build what the user asks, tells you they want, understand what they need, because most stakeholders, clients, customers, patients, whatever you want to call it, we're assuming that they have self-diagnosed quite well, and the truth is they often don't, because they're in an execution mode. They're not looking below the symptomatic nature of their problem, which connects to the other ones, which is 4, help them join the dots. A lot of people, again, it's sales and marketing. So what's interesting is the extent to which this might be a broader issue is most people in jobs just get the job done. I don't have time to think about re-engineering it or processes. Most people in sales and marketing, they're not process driven, they're not maybe operationally focused. They're told what to do, and it's about execute. So you need to help them join the dots between the different processes and the systems. And when you help them see that, then you can help them solve more structurally than constantly these sugar fixes with data analytics initiatives. Again, the 5th one, the faster horse thing. And when we started, we built a lot of self-serve. Everyone says build self-serve BI, democratize data. And you know what we did? It didn't work. You know why? Because in most cases, people use the data to reaffirm already held convictions. They didn't use it to challenge themselves. They didn't use it to think about new ways of working or forming ideas about that challenge their own perceptions of the world. They used it to support their existing narrative. They discarded any data that in any way challenged their already held beliefs and political narratives in many ways. So you have to be very careful with self-serve BI. We call it sort of guided BI, where there is direction, there are guardrails for decision making, but if you leave it completely unbounded, everybody uses data in a completely different way, and you end up speeding up and almost augmenting the pace of dissonance in the organization. And the last one is hire transformers and technologists. For every technical person I hire a person whose job is to use the data and to help the organization transform how they execute. It's like a McKinsey specialist that walks into the office of the CMO or the CFO and says, tell me what your problem is and let me show you how to use data to solve that problem. Do not hire technologists, just have a team of PhD students or data science experts. It's no use unless someone is able to translate that into a language that business can use. So they're the simple rules. I suppose just to wrap up, my observation is, and again, a little bit different to some of the environments on the call here today, if you're in FMCG, where decision-making is maybe centralized, i.e., what is the optimal stack rate for products in a store? It's probably a small team of people to take ownership of that. But in B2B and sales and marketing environments, nearly all the decision making is completely distributed. Okay, everyone has the power to execute. Again, there is a strategy, but it's entirely up to you how you interpret it, because in most cases it's not operationalized. Gartner will tell you that the biggest issue with the 70% failure rate is culture. So this is what we're trying to pick into, because when you talk to individuals, they say, "Well, I know this is what we should be doing. This is what I know, yeah, but this is what we're actually doing." And when you actually look at it, they're actually doing something slightly different. So there's almost this cognitive dissonance going on across the organization. There's multiple perspectives on reality, and it's like wildfire. It's everywhere. So again, back to this idea of coherence. I'd argue it doesn't exist. And what's funny is, it's a little bit like, I think there's a thing about the madness of King George, that a madman doesn't know he's mad. Because if you are hired in to fix a problem, they will say, yeah, this is the strategy, this is what we're doing. But they're not really. They think they're doing that. You go to the CEO or the CRO, they will tell you that there is a version of reality that they're executing against, when I would argue that the truth is far from that. There's a lot more dissonance in the organization. So if you try and solve for what is presented to you as a clear roadmap to execute, you're already on the path to failure. So what the area I'm interested in researching then is how, if at all, can data and analytics artifacts be used to actually surface this dissonance. The general area of cultural phenomena in the broad sense, but in particular around coherence, because the experience we've had is the biggest benefit we've had as a project team, and we've paid like hundreds of millions of dollars, is we got everybody sharing a smaller set of shared mental models. Before that, it was chaos. Everyone was doing their own thing. But not only that, no one knew that everyone was doing their own thing. So you had a double-edged sword. And secondly, are there specific artifacts or methodologies that can help with this surfacing of disconnect and help get people to sort of to convene around a more common area of strategic coherence? In an ideal world, I'd love to come up with something, an artifact which actually captured that whole problem. But then that's in principle, that's the work ahead. Okay, so that's it, guys. I won't go any further. I'll come back maybe to even the previous page and leave it at this one. So that's it in a fairly fast-paced nutshell. So happy to take any questions.
Yeah, good man, Barry. And very, very interesting insights. I love the idea, that most people don't want accurate information, but validated information. But I just want to pull you in a slightly different direction, Barry, as I normally do. But
Here goes.
I'm really intrigued because you are, and you've really been consistent in saying very often it doesn't require these advanced high fidelity data solutions. But also, I think what I take from your approach, it doesn't either require these high cost digital transformation efforts. Would it be fair to say you've gone about developing this initiative through more organic, I'm going to say maybe even a more guerrilla renegade style of build a bit, see what happens, iterate around approach?
Yeah, I mean, I won't pretend that I did that through intention, but with just practicality. Like this, what is now a multi-million-dollar enterprise application started off as an Excel spreadsheet. So you're absolutely right, Paulie. So we started off incredibly low fidelity back in IBM when there was no budget. So what would be interesting if we did this? And over time, it evolved. Went from a spreadsheet to a more complex spreadsheet, and then you had rules in it, and eventually it moved onto the cloud, and then you started putting stuff into it, and then you've got data arc, all these things in it. But absolutely, my own personal view was that if we had started with high fidelity, it would have obscured the real reason we were creating value. In actual fact, I've worked with multiple data science teams along the way, and they are the ones who have the biggest problems in getting any traction on any of their outputs, because no one could interpret them. Oh, great, your model's telling me to do this. Why? They couldn't answer. Oh, the machine, that's just the algorithm is telling us. And that connection between the output from let's say an ML or an AI artifact and the interpretability, in particular in business to business. And that's critical, because in B2B, a human has to talk to a human. I can't ring up a customer and say, hi, the machine learning algorithm told me you're a 3.45 on the Richter scale. Can I have the purchase order now? You must be able to translate. So yeah, we absolutely grew from very low fidelity, and we're still low fidelity. I mean, we'll go into all that stuff in due course.
Yeah, and I think it isn't just low fidelity outputs, but actually a low fidelity approach to developing those outputs, Barry. And that was maybe the comment I was making. In a way, did you avoid building up resistance in the organization by starting in a very organic, low key, nearly guerrilla style,
Well, I mean, insofar as by doing it the way we did it, we were able to show demonstrable impacts on the business before I went looking to someone for a check to fund a big platform. So absolutely. I mean, there was, prototyping, all that type of stuff. Now it's a proper enterprise application, it's multi-million-dollar project, and there's a lot of sophistication in it, but it did not start. I would never have got anywhere if I'd said I needed $500,000 to build this thing. Would never have happened.
Yeah.